Okay, guys, so here's a little adventure I went on up near Restoule, Ontario, to check out some of the Crown land. This is me. This is the map you can see there, and I'm exiting off of Porter's Landing Road here. There's two trail entrances that you can get to, and I took the first one in, and yeah, we're gonna go back in the trails and explore some of this Crown land. So as I enter in here, we just had a rainfall, a pretty bad storm the night before, and it came down in droves for about an hour. Now, usually this section is pretty rutted out from ATVs, but when I go through the trail, I realize that there hasn't been that many ATVs through here, which is not that bad. So the pools weren't overly deep. Now this section here is also pretty bad because it's hard packed clay as I come up to this next section. So after a rainfall, it is so slick. Actually, right here is where I flipped an ATV last year as it slid down the hill. That's about a 2-foot drop. One thing you'll notice with this GoPro, it's the Hero 7 Black. It has the stabilization built in. It's amazing how steady the video is, but it doesn't do it justice with how rutted out some of these trails are and how big some of the rocks are and how bumpy it is. So it looks a lot more stable than it actually is. I think you can't get a good perspective of the depth of the ruts or the size of the rocks because the GoPro is also mounted on top of the helmet rather than lower down where I think you would see it. So up this hill, there's pretty good elevation. There's two pretty big hills. This one here is really washed out. There's basically a river running down before. Sometimes I've seen in the early spring water just flowing down this hill. That's why it's so washed out. Those are big rocks that you have to go over. The YZ250FX is, the suspension's fantastic to get up this stuff. You can just cook up there. That little trail off to the left there goes into Woodcock Lake. It's a trail that, you know, is pretty easy to get to the lake. It's right there. But that lake, I fished it once. It has, we caught a couple small bass and a decent sized perch out of there. But I think there's some better lakes in here for fishing. So these trails are well marked. To the right is where you would go towards Crooked Lake, which I'm going to show you in another video, some of the trails to get there. But these are all ATV, or I should say snowmobile trails. A lot of them are used by ATVs, which they do carve out some pretty big ruts and holes, as I said before, because it does get muddy, as you can see. But they're well maintained, certain sections, at least the sections I know, by the Snowmobiler Club. So I try my best not to gun it and tear up these trails to make it uneven. And the nice thing about the bike is that you can pick your lines off to the side and stay on the firm ground so you're not digging big holes into the trails. So these wet sections aren't that bad. You know, I could go through the middle there. They're pretty dark and muddy, so you can't see the bottom. But most of them are, middle of the wheel, front tire up. And nothing is going up into the engine at all. Some of the other trails around here they get pretty thick. I don't know them that well. And you can get soaked. I got soaked today, as you see further on this trail, as I explored an area that I've never been before. It gets pretty messy. You can see this is rutted out again. It's fun to go through there. It's sandy and gravel, so it's decent drainage through this section. But it's a pretty fast, smooth flowing track through here. As we're coming up here, we're coming up to two lakes that are called Bob's Lake and Kid Lake. So this section's always pretty worn out. As you can see, I stalled and have to put my foot down into the puddle. That was the first soaker of the day. The electric start on the YZ250 is nice and convenient, so you're not kicking in puddles. But as you come up here, this is one of my favorite sections coming up in this entire trail. Is it's between the Bob's Lake and Kid Lake. It's a nice granite kind of outcropping of rock, and you sit up a little bit higher, you can see down to both lakes. So here it is here. It's actually quite the incline. It's nice to go up the granite face, and when you get to the top, if you stop, you have an option to go down to the left there, which is Bob's Lake, and then to the right is Kid Lake. So I decided to take a little trip down. There's a few boats chained up down here, and you get a nice view of the one end of the lake. Now, Kid Lake is a lake that I do fish every once in a while. It has great bass in there. You get smallmouth and the odd largemouth in certain sections. And I just found out that it does have northern pike on there. My dad and I were back here one time, and we had a double header of two northern pike. They're small ones, but I have fished quite a bit, or I did fish here quite a bit last fall. And we don't bring any leaders, but we did lose a lot of lures to, I'm assuming they were pike, because the bass wouldn't break the line like that. But it's a good lake for bass. If you like going for bass, they're pretty plentiful in this lake. So it's a good turnaround spot here. I'm just kind of looking around, seeing what's happening in the area. I haven't been in there for a while, but coming back up, you definitely want to get a decent run at this, or if you're on an ATV, you can climb it with relative ease. But it's pretty vertical in certain sections and uneven because of the rock, but it's a nice climb. So hanging a right here will take you back on the trail towards the Rainy Lakes, so the Little Rainy and Rainy. These are two lakes that I don't really know well. I've never been on them. Last year I was doing a hike through here with my dog and Krista, and we took a stop and we had a lunch. We just had a little camp stove that we made some snacks and some, I think, hot drinks there, and we sat out on the rock. It looks like a beautiful lake, but in this video, unfortunately, we don't really see it. I'll show you guys where it is, but there are some camps on there, so I didn't go onto their property, obviously, as it's private. I just stayed away from there. So on an interesting note, the night before, or I guess it was the early morning before, we heard a bunch of wolves back in this area. So there's a pack there. They weren't really yipping, they're howling quite a bit, and they're calling to one another. It was about 5 in the morning when we heard it, and they're back in this section of land. I don't know where, but I know when we walked it last fall, we did come across 2 big piles of wolf scat, and we realized after that there's a study going around in this area about the Algonquin wolf and trying to get data, I think, on whether they're timber wolves and Algonquin wolves. I came across a really neat study that was published on YouTube, or presentation, I should say, and they talked about the distribution. In this area, it seems like what researchers have found is that there's a mix of gray wolves and which are like the standard timber wolf or Great Lakes wolf in this area, as well as the Algonquin wolf. So there's kind of a mix right in here. And then when you go towards Algonquin, you get a lot more of the Algonquin wolf, obviously, and then less of the actual gray wolf. And that's where the coyotes go in. But in this area, there's not many coyotes from what they found through the DNA testing, which is very, very interesting. So I've seen a few wolves back here, some when I've been fishing, and then others, we've actually had one on our property, which is kind of weird because it's way out in the open. But interesting animals. I'd love to run into a pack back here or hear them when I'm camping back in the Crown Land, but I haven't yet, but always on the lookout. This section here is about as far as I've gone in the past. There to the left is one of the Rainy Lakes. I'm not sure if it's Little or Big Rainy, but that's where we sat out there and had lunch that one time, and it just looks like a beautiful lake from what we could see. We've also seen a lot of moose signs in this area, a lot of hoof prints and droppings in this area in the past, but from here on out is basically unexplored area, a region for me. So I didn't know what this trail was going to show. There's no ATV track, so nobody's really been using this recently, and parts of it was pretty overgrown. So I'm assuming that as the season goes on, it gets more overgrown. I'm not sure where this trail goes to. So if anybody has been down this trail, further snowmobilers or people that are off-road or just even hunted it, I'd love to know where it goes because I did end up turning around because I was bogging down a little too much. One thing to note as well is I didn't get cell service back here. So I didn't have a safety kit or anything on me. I just was exploring and just to be safe. That's one of the reasons why I turned around. I didn't want to get too far back and then blow a tire or have mechanical issues or get hurt and have to try to push the bike out of here, because it did get pretty sloppy, as you'll see coming up. So this is pretty deep mud in all these sections. Now you can see the tire ruts from old ATV trails. This looked like it was from, there wasn't much use. There's a few tread marks, but that's it. I think these were all from years past because the holes in the middle were not that deep when I did run some of the puddles. Usually they get rutted pretty deep, pretty quick if ATVs are spinning their tires in there. So I don't think there's much use in this section, at least this year. Now we have had a really rainy spring and early summer, so I think most people have probably avoided the trails, probably for good reason at the start of the year, but now they're definitely doable on an ATV and even on a bike, but it does get mucky through here. This is the area, like I said, I have no idea what it's like, so I'm taking my time going through here because I don't know these puddles at all. And then I stalled again, as you can see. Why do I always stall in the middle of a puddle and have to put my foot down? My feet were soaked afterwards. But I was being very cautious through here because I didn't know where I was, what was around here, and I just wanted to make sure I didn't go down or wreck the bike way back here, because it's a few kilometers of pushing through mud would have been hell to get through here. This part here, I didn't realize that there's those logs. I got hung up on the logs. My back tire got stuck. I was spinning, and as you'll hear me in a minute, huffing and puffing trying to get the bike around there. Now the YZ250 it's about 240, I think, with a full tank, 240 pounds. So it's not that bad moving it. It was hung up on the back there. It was dug in pretty good. So trying to move it on unstable logs with soaking wet feet sliding everywhere was a bitch, I'll be honest. But we got over it, and I don't know why I just didn't run the puddle, because you can see it's pretty clear, and it looks like it's not that deep, so I should have just went that. What's funny, on the way back, I thought to myself when I left here that on the way back I will run the puddle and I'll avoid these logs. And what did I do? I went right over the logs again, and I got stuck once again. So yeah, I guess you just don't learn.
No, I should have just gone through.
So right now the back end of the bike is down a hill, so that's why it was so hard to push it up there. Even if I started it, it would have been spinning on the end of those logs. So I'm just happy I got it up, and then once I got it going here, it was pretty easy to get out of that section. This is the part where I start questioning how much further should I go, and do I really want to go through more shit like this? I questioned turning around at this point as well, and I thought, what the hell, I'll go a little bit further. I was really hoping that the tip of Rainy Lake, this trail would curl around the end so I could see the lake from one end. Unfortunately, it never got to that point. I would love to know if you can get to that point. Once again, I stalled in the water. I always do that. I'm not sure if just a rookie mistake or what, but not the best place to stall. So if you've been on this trail and you do know that if it does access one of the Rainy Lakes at this end, I'd love to know, or if there's other lakes down in this area that you can access from the trail. It'd be very cool to investigate if I go down here again. So coming up here is where I realized I had enough. I was getting pretty tired. I knew I wanted to go down and investigate towards Crooked Lake, which I'll show you in another video. But this part here, I ended up getting off the bike and walking it off to the side, and it was just too much. I didn't want to get bogged down once again, so I ended up flipping the UE. So hope you guys enjoyed. Reach out to us if you've been on this trail before, if you know any other trails close by.